Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Encounter Grace. My name is Ben Hendricks, and I am here with Jason McKnight, as always. And today, we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, something that I've found to be one of, if not, well, definitely one of the most important things in the life of a Christian, and actually even outside of probably just the Christian faith in general. To quote you to make this really powerful, that after faithfulness to Christ, this one thing is the single most important focus that we must have. And you said specifically as elders. And so this one thing, I think we all know it, and you know it because you've read the title, and that's why you clicked on it. But this one thing, when we have it, we all know we have it. When we have it with someone else, and then when we're missing it, we all know that too. And then people can kind of notice that around us. And it's, of course, this thing called unity. And it's near and dear to my heart because over the last 6 years, I've gotten to see in beautiful flying colors what unity looks like. As elders have gotten to have hard conversations in a loving manner where the goal was not just a decision, but a unified decision and a deeper walk together and then ultimately with Jesus. I've gotten to watch it as a staff, as we've kind of looked for the same things, needing to make decisions, but ultimately needing unity together. But I've seen it in house church and just across the body here at Grace. We are a church that God has blessed, and I've seen it again in these last 6 years, but also in the last 20-something years, that God has blessed with probably one of the greatest things, and it's unity. And so, Jason, I've been wanting to have this discussion with you because with something that's so important, and yet we can all, I think, admit this, is so rare.
Yeah.
What else could we talk about? Why have we waited so long to talk about this?
Well, because we're still getting it right.
Well, yeah.
We always will be.
So I'm an optimist with you guys. Anyways, so what I know what we want to do today is kind of talk about this amazing thing called unity. I mean, and kind of ask you, like, well, why is it so important?
Yeah.
Why do we need it? How do we get it? How do we maintain it? You know, all the big asks. So, Jason, thank you so much just for kind of putting all this together and navigating this with us.
Well, what's really fun here at Grace is to watch God work. And we know that when you look at the results that God is looking for, He isn't looking for numbers or money or, as they say, butts in the seats or anything like that. Like, those things are incidental. They don't automatically mean that things are going well or that things are pleasing the Lord. But what He's looking for is those few things that He calls us to. And so what you started with is faithfulness to Jesus. That's the number one thing He wants in a marriage, in any relationship, in any family, in any local church, amongst the leadership of any local church or ministry. Faithfulness to Jesus, the fidelity to the gospel. And then I think right underneath that is the idea of unity. Ben, you preached on this in marriage 2 or 3, 4 weeks ago, is that you are the you in unity, or what was that phrase that you said?
Unity begins with you.
That's it. Unity. See, I got the idea. I didn't get the memory work. But unity begins with you. And you were saying, like, I can't expect my wife to get unified with me. I got to do the hard work.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about when I look at churches and ministries and then families where unity matters and marriages where it makes a difference, is that everyone's working at it. Nobody coasts into unity.
It's true. You don't accidentally fall into it, for sure.
It all takes a little bit of work. So we want to lay out some thoughts that we've had. And Ben, you and I have talked a lot about this. Kent has been in these conversations, elders here at Grace, and then other ministry leaders around the country and in different ministries. Like, anything that we say today, we've learned and reflected on. So
Yeah.
I never claimed anything original.
Well, and so let's start off with why do you think we need unity? And here's why I actually think this question's important, is because this may sound wild, but there are a lot of leaders who don't think unity is as important as it is.
They think their agenda is more important.
Okay.
And that's not true. My agenda is not more important than unity. But wait, I'm a leader. Certainly people should follow. Yes, but I'm not an infallible leader. Nobody elected me Pope yet. So Jesus' agenda matters more. And my agenda, as far as it lines up with Jesus, matters. But I don't know when it's not totally lined up with Jesus. So That's where unity is a helpful. I kind of thought about this. Why do we need unity as leaders, whether it's a husband and wife in the home, elders in a church, or even like, Ben, like you and the youth team, the team that ministers to these 40 and 50 high school students and middle school students. Imagine if you didn't have unity. Yeah. Imagine if there was backbiting. Imagine if there was paranoia. Imagine if you come on a Sunday night and three of them are doing like three different things that you don't even think is part of the game. Okay, why do we need it? Well, here's what I think. I think of four reasons why we need unity. Number one is theological. Each of us is different, but when we are unified in our relationship and our forward momentum, our action plan, our agenda, we are reflecting the unity in diversity of God himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So, they're in complete agreement. Again, we say this a lot. Whenever we talk about the Trinity, do we say he or they? He is in complete agreement with himself. They are in complete agreement with themselves. Like the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, they're different persons, but they have a mutual submission and joy and division of labor and genuine humility, and they're moving in the same direction. Anytime we aren't faction-ridden, but are moving in the same direction, we are reflecting the unity and diversity and unity that is a hallmark of God's character and being. And I think that's amazing. I think that's just unbelievable. So I think, first of all, unity is a theological necessity. I think, secondly, it's a missional pathway, an evangelistic pathway. Where do I get this? Well, Jesus' last prayer before he dies, John 17. Well, last prayer before his passion, let's say. Okay. Because there's a couple prayers on the cross. But John 17, last prayer before his passion, he prays in verses 22 and 23, and he prays not just for the apostles, but for all who would believe in their message, so that's us, that we may be, that Jesus says they, so us, may be one. Jesus continues, as we are one, he and the Father, I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly one. So it's all about unity, God and Jesus, the Father and the Son in us, believers, that we may be perfectly one. And then this, so that the world may know that you, Father, sent me and loved them, even as you loved me. The whole point Jesus wants us as his people to be unified is that then the world will know. And we get that, don't we? I mean, what we definitely know of anything in the world is that it is so hard to keep relationships going in the same direction. Yeah. And there just is the opportunity for hurt feelings and wounds and generational things that go wrong and blah, blah, blah. And when a group of people come from different backgrounds and come and are part of one church and we work together for unity because we all love Jesus, the rest of our friends and family, they stand up and take notice because it's so rare in this world that I would submit to you and you would submit to me and we would submit to them and they would submit to us, all because we're just trying to follow Jesus. Unity is an evangelistic pathway. So it's a theological necessity and it's an evangelistic pathway.
That's so good. Because no matter where we are, even like from a cultural standpoint, like no matter how much it can be touted of like, hey, we're for unity and we're for love, like when you actually see them practically, it's just strange to see it in the best way. Like when the church puts on unity and love and portrays it to the world, like people just don't always know what to do with it because I think outside of the church, we see like a facade of it in so many ways. And it's like, what a great evangelistic pathway that really is. I think you're spot on.
It really is. Well, third reason why we need it is it's a pragmatic reason why we need it in any leadership team, from a mom and a dad, a husband and wife in home, to elders in a church. It's a pragmatic reason. Just run it the opposite way. Think of a team without unity, and what do you have? You have factions vying for power. You have uncertainty in decisions, you have insecurity in relationships, and as elders, you have insecurity in relationships among each other as elders, and then between elders and the body. And it's just a disaster. You have power politics as some group is asserting their agenda. It's a pragmatic reason we need unity because nobody wants to be part of a group that isn't going anywhere. Nothing gets accomplished. Wheels spin in place, and then the wheels fall off the cart. So the pragmatic reason for unity is just simple. Without it, we have frustration and we have failure. So there's a pragmatic. It's honestly, it's an effectiveness lead measure.
Yeah.
When there's unity, you know there will be effectiveness.
Yeah.
And that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, which is exactly what I was just speaking on earlier. Like, I mean, it's just from the unity we've seen, that's one of the reasons why I think here at Grace, so many of the ministries, I mean, not really just as a church, that we are so, I believe, effective in the community, effective in discipleship, just effective in general, because it's a breeding a culture of unity.
Yeah.
Because the leadership's that way.
Yeah. And then the last reason that I thought of, and probably we could sit here and think of 12 more, but this is enough to get us going: a theological necessity, an evangelistic pathway. Thirdly, an effectiveness lead measure. And then lastly, it's the seed of a Christ-exalting body. So unity among parents, seed of a Christ-exalting family; unity among elders, seed of a Christ-exalting church. Why do I say that? Because if we, let's say as elders or as pastors and elders and leaders, if we don't work for unity, if we don't do that hard work for unity amongst ourselves, we can never hope for it amongst the body at large. And then there's going to be factions and backbiting and gossip and whatever amongst the whole body if we're not working at the hard work of unity, because a bad tree can't bear good fruit.
Sounds good. I wonder who said that.
Who said that? So the hard work of unity at the leader level, elders, parents, C-suite in your Christian company, it's the only way to get the good fruit of it throughout.
And I always love that thought, because, I mean, and I think you gave two different ideas there of like, unity matters from the top down, like at the very top, like, because that culture breeds unity throughout the body. I mean, that's the way from the elders down to staff, to house church leaders, and to leaders all throughout different ministries, and just in the body. Like that level of unity at the top, trickles down.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's also a reason why unity matters at every single level. And so, yes, it absolutely matters at that very tip top, and we need it there because that's where culture gets produced. But it gets carried on by leaders along the way who are also searching and yearning for more and more unity. And what I love is, just examples you gave of so unity is not just a business thing. It's not just a church thing. It's a parent thing. It's a marriage thing. It's a friendship thing. And so this isn't just, you just need to, at work, when you get to work, how do you build unity? Like, no, this is about unity with your spouse. This is about unity with your kids. And unity with friends, like all of that matters, and because this is a holistic kind of thing.
My parents taught us this really young, is like basically the worst thing we could ever do as kids was lie. So that was the worst thing. The second worst thing, or pretty close to it, was trying to play a parent off the other. And if ever we said that mom said yes when she didn't, when we're talking to dad, or dad said yes when he didn't, when we're talking to mom, we were being in big trouble. I mean, that was the worst, because parents have to be together. And my folks taught us this, as a rug rat, 5 and 6 and 7 years old, you cannot play your parents off each other.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because unity matters. Oh yeah, it's the sine qua non of healthy leadership, the thing that you can't have unless you have this.
That's where God gave the 10 Commandments, right? Anyways, okay. So I remember as we started talking about this, you kind of gave me this idea, and I'd love for you to navigate through it, maybe quickly or in length, however long you think, of kind of that not all unity is the same, and that there's at least two types of unity. Yeah. Could you kind of navigate that and help us just kind of understand that a little bit?
I think it's helpful for us to break down this bigger concept of unity into things in the moment and things in the overall, into this decision or this item or this incident, and then that general environment and atmosphere. So I call it incidental unity. How do we work towards that? And then foundational unity. How do we work towards that? And they're obviously related, but there's different strengths and different things you need.
So kind of like how you can still be in unity in a marriage, but you might be in disagreement on a particular issue or something. Yeah.
And even disagreement isn't disunity.
Sure. That's a good point.
And we'll talk about that later. It's how you disagree.
Oh.
and what you do with it.
I can't wait to listen to this podcast.
There might be. Well, let's talk about incidental unity, because you're right, though. I mean, let's say I am in disagreement with Susan on something right now. That doesn't mean the foundational unity of our marriage is broken.
That's true, yeah.
It's the incidental unity isn't there in this moment.
Okay.
But then again, we will talk at the end about disagreeing agreeably, as it were. Incidental unity is when you're looking to make a decision, and how do you do your best to make sure that a decision is bought into by the most people, and those who don't buy into it aren't gritting their teeth and working against it and being passive aggressive, which sounds terrible. What parent or what elder or what, but you know what? We're all humans. So what I think of as incidental unity is a goodwill saturated consensus around a decision or direction that's been fully vetted and discussed. If you want incidental unity, what you're looking for is a goodwill saturated consensus around some decision or some direction which has been fully vetted and discussed. So decision or direction, that's the nub of this, because you're making a decision. And as parents and as elders and as team leaders, you got to make the call. You got to set the course. You got to move the ball forward for the body as a whole, your kids, your church, whatever. Take saying yes to some things, no to other things, and not yet to other ideas. Because every decision has to be resourced. Every positive decision has to be resourced. So in the church context, let's just take a few things. Do we undertake a mission trip this year? Yes, no, or not yet? Do we increase support to the local pregnancy center or the local camp? Yes, no, or not yet? What's the next hire for our church? Well, if we hire 4 new youth pastors because our youth is growing, it means we can't hire 4 new worship pastors. Because our worship, how do we engage cultural hot points of the moment? If a missionary's marriage is in trouble, how do we work for the redemption of it? That's think about that. And this is something that we need incidental unity on as elders, say, because let's say they're over there in Eastern Europe or in somewhere in Africa or Asia. How do we lead into that? And some would say, well, let's take them off the field so they can heal. Others would say if a marriage breaks down, it's evidence of some other thing and they need to be pulled out of ministry. Others would say, let's provide resources for them in that moment. And that's 3 legitimate decisions. I could get on board with any one of them. But if person 1, 2, and 3 is set in their ways on those decisions, how do we get to incidental unity? All that kind of stuff. Situations differ. So, but the point is, we always need to be making decisions and setting direction. It's part of leading. You don't get to lead and not have to make the call.
Yeah.
So also we should probably do an episode on wisdom. How do you find wisdom? And we really should actually. But here in unity, okay, well, how do we take that decision and direction and then go the next step, which is fully vet it, fully discuss it. Because you can never get unity if you don't fully vet something, fully discuss something. It means that everyone's voice is heard, as many options as you can think of are considered, and many of them are registered as worth pursuing. Good leadership it's not good leadership if you make a decision and then have 5 people later say, well, did you think of X? Oops, we never thought of that. Now, you can't always think of every option, but you try to do your best.
Yeah.
I like thinking of it in military terms, after action review. I like to do that before the action.
Amen.
How can we make sure, decisions made hastily and urgently often short circuit the vetting process. And this is the problem with a crisis, because everything, which is why foundational unity is needed. But incidental unity in a crisis is really tough if foundational unity is not there, because you don't have the time to fully vet and discuss. Or maybe you do. Maybe you just spend that next 5 minutes praying and deliberating and not being pressured.
Yeah.
Very, very few things, if you're not in a cardiac arrest situation where you're not having a committee meeting anyway, very few things can't afford 5 more minutes of prayer.
I just found that to be true. That's just a great reminder, because I find, look, it's so funny. I can 100% affirm that. And yet in the moment, every time, I don't have 5 minutes to spare.
We think.
Because we've got to, exactly. We think.
That's true.
That's so good.
So fully vetted and discussed direction and decisions But the key to unity is not the decision. It doesn't matter. Honestly, I really don't think to God it matters in about 90% of the decisions we have to make. I don't think it matters to him which one we do. I think it matters how we do it. So do we fully vet it? And then is the first part of our working definition, is there a goodwill saturated consensus?
I do want to say that because you just said this, and I actually think this is a really powerful thing for people to remember, like, and for me to remember, because it's like, it does feel like the majority of the time it's not, we misunderstand our decisions and our situations as a good versus bad. Like, what's the, like, as if like there's going to be a wrong choice here. But it does seem like so often in decision making, it's the, well, how do you, I mean, it's weighing out, it's discussing, and it's what you just said, like getting to a goodwill saturated decision, not just a decision, because it's not good or bad. It's just, this one might be a little better, but you got a goodwill saturated decision on the other side. So go there.
So, and again, it's not the decision, it's the consensus.
Yeah.
It's the sense in the room around the table among the husband and wife or wherever you are. That is goodwill saturated. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? So it's this consensus there that's goodwill saturated. Well, goodwill saturated means we respect each other. We have a high level of mutuality in this. We're not railroading anything through. We're seeking the best of everyone around the table and those who will be affected. We're living into the assumption of goodwill around the table. And if I sit across the table in an elders meeting and think that person over there has a hidden agenda and he's not saying it, I don't have goodwill towards him. I'm trying to find out the angle.
Yeah.
And if that person over there really does have a hidden agenda, he does not have goodwill towards the rest in the body. I mean, you have to say what you think. And if you don't say what you think, you're not building any kind of consensus or any kind of goodwill. So to saturate it. And this is what guards against suspicion and paranoia and thoughts of conspiracy. Anyone think of a president recently?
No.
I mean, just, but we're not talking naivety here in the body of Christ. Intentionally holding goodwill as we run through the whole decision, the whole discussion, the whole direction, the whole vetting, holding goodwill and saying, well, I know Ben loves Jesus. I don't agree with how he's saying this, but I know he loves Jesus, and I may never agree with him on this, but at least I don't think he's bad or stupid or evil. And I think there's a lot of that goes on in people's hearts.
Yeah. I found that to be such a helpful thing for me just in dealing with people, because it's like I am, especially in my past, definitely quick to jump to, well, they must be dumb then, or they,
right,
or like, and write them off as a bad person, or they just are lazy because they didn't think it through. But it's like, and I actually think I've learned this in the last 6 years here at Grace and I don't think this is the right phrase, but like giving people the benefit of the doubt. Like, and there's probably a better phrase, but just being like assuming that they put in the effort, whether they, and it's not, again, not being naive. It's just going, hey, I know you, and I know you're wise, and I know you're loving. I know you love Jesus, and I don't know it right this second with this decision or with that comment or whatever, but I know those things are true, and I'm going to assume they're true even here. And it's like that. Because of that, I regret far fewer of my responses, and I regret far fewer of my decisions when I do that. Because more often than not, it's a reality.
Extending the benefit of the doubt saves us so much drama.
Yeah.
It just does. And here's the example from Scripture for extending the benefit of the doubt. It's at the end of the book of Joshua, right before as for me and my house. Like, we love that part, right before then. The 2.5 Transjordan tribes go back home. They've left their wives and their kids and their flocks on the east side of the Jordan. They've come over into the promised land to help the 9.5 tribes conquer the land that they're supposed to conquer. And as they're going home, they set up an altar right at the Jordan River where they're supposed to pass, kind of near Jericho, we would say. And they set up that altar there, and they say to themselves, we're setting this up as an altar of remembrance so that the 9.5 tribes will remember that we, on the other side of the Jordan, are part of the people of God. Okay, so they set this up. They water ski over the Jordan, and now they're back farming and under their own vine and fig tree. the 9.5 tribes stumble across this altar. This is, I think, Joshua 22. They stumble across the altar and they say, oh, look at these guys. They're over the Jordan and they're already pagan worshiping. They think the altar is a pagan worship altar because that's what they've just destroyed in Canaan. So they've seen a lot of them. They think, oh my goodness, these people have already gone apostate, and to arms, everyone. And they muster the troops. It's going to be the first civil war. They've been in the land 5 years. They're going to have a first civil war. And finally, they muster the troops and they call out. And then the leaders from the 2.5 Transjordan tribes, they say, guys, no, we just want to make sure you remember we're one of you. It's just an altar of remembrance. We're not worshiping any bad gods here. We're just giving thanks. And I remember the day I was reading that in my quiet time, because I'm quick to judge too, like you say you are. And I love to put people in a box. It's very fun to be on a pedestal. And the Lord just says, you idiot, look at this.
Yeah.
I love you, you idiot, he says to me. And the whole idea of, you know what, we got to extend the benefit of the doubt. And we've got to not think the worst of people and try to find the best. And not be naive about it, because there are wolves in sheep clothing out there. But as far as we can, goodwill saturated. We gotta figure it out. So, a goodwill saturated consensus where a decision and direction has been fully vetted and discussed. Now, incidental unity, a goodwill saturated consensus around a decision or direction that's been fully vetted and discussed. We talked it all through. No one's held anything back. It's a decision a decision point or direction we have to take. And then how do we get there? A goodwill saturated consensus. Now, in our leadership here at Grace, consensus is a key word. Robert's Rules of Order says about voting, and then you vote. And then if something has 50 plus 1% of the vote, it carries, motion carries. We don't, as far as we can help it, we don't make decisions that way with the votes where we kind of press for a decision. We got to approve the budget. We got to approve the budget. It's the end of the year. No, consensus is better than a vote. Consensus is the heart and the sense of where we should go. We're together in it, we're together in it. And so instead of counting noses, we're cultivating hearts. Now, it's hard.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work. Unity takes work. Consensus is harder than, but you know what happens is when we all leave, I mean, there have been many years we haven't approved the budget when the calendar says we should, but we go home and we pray about it and we approve the budget a month later than the calendar says we should. Did anyone not get paid? No. It still worked okay. Did any missionary not get paid? No. You just carry on with the last budget until you have that consensus. And I mean, there's a consensus isn't counting noses. It's cultivating hearts. It's enough willingness to move forward. And that's where I actually think in the Lord's work and in the home, in the church and in the home, that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
That is a really important. In an election in a country or a state or a city where everyone pops one thing and it's anonymous, that's one thing. But here in the shepherding of the body or the shepherding of the children, I think consensus matters more than votes.
Yeah, and I think that's just a hard thing to navigate because there could be so many external pressures to say, hey, this decision matters more than the unity of the decision or the unity of the consensus. Like, and I mean, look, Janessa and I feel that a lot. Like, I mean, with whether it's parenting or not, because it's like, if we don't make the decision, we're going to ruin our daughter's life.
Right.
Because everything's on the line. Like,
You've already ruined her life.
Yeah, I know.
But you're right. Everything's on the line.
Yeah, it feels like that. Like, I mean, like we've got to know how many hours of screen time. If we mess this up, everything's on. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe 3 more days of mistakes are probably worth it so we can get to one really good place and we can both be behind a decision. And it's worked.
Amen.
And, you know, we fall into that. But
that's a lot of incidental unity, like in the moment, on a decision, on the direction. But then there's the atmosphere. There's the foundational level of unity. And what's almost the background music of, is there unity? Because it's fine. We can all be agreed that, yes, we got to build this building or we got to buy that van for the ministry or whatever. But the foundational level of unity, the atmosphere, the background music of unity, and I use this as a working definition of that kind of foundational unity is a spirit-wrought atmosphere that allows for continued God-honoring consensus. Now, there's that consensus word again, that sense that we're going in the same direction. But a spirit-wrought, it's his work, atmosphere, background music, environment, spirit-wrought atmosphere that allows for, that engenders, that enhances continued God-honoring consensus. That's what I think foundational unity is. The place that we're living, which is a work of the Spirit, where he is the one that brings it about. And it enables us in our incidental things to keep moving forward because there's this broader sense of goodwill around us. And there's this desire to move forward together. I do think at Grace and several other churches, all of our church plants, the idea that we have some of our doctrine that's in bold that every member must affirm, and some of our doctrine that's in plain typeface, that is what Grace believes, but if you individually as a member don't believe it, you don't have to. I think that allows for unity and allows for a spirit-wrought atmosphere that allows for continued God-honoring consensus, because we all have enough that we absolutely are in lockstep on the resurrection of Jesus, the atonement of Jesus, the exclusivity of Jesus, the Word of God as infallible, his only word to us, and so on and so forth, the Trinity. But, you know, we've had people here who are infant Baptists, and we're a believer Baptist church, and they're still unable to participate in the body. And when we dedicate their baby, they just make sure they sneeze over them. Put a little water on them. But, you know, it doesn't preclude, that level doesn't preclude. And what actually it does is it enhances this atmosphere, this goodwill saturation, this spirit-wrought atmosphere. Yeah. And I think it's fantastic. Now, that's a way in our church we've allowed for that. I think each family in their marriage and in the kids, they have to figure out what a spirit-wrought atmosphere that allows for continued God-honoring consensus is. But a foundational unity among elders is super important because there can be togetherness on individual discrete decisions, and then backbiting and division in the general sense. We got to keep leaning into that. So foundational unity. Once you get the incidental stuff, I mean, foundation, you get it. But I think when you keep leaning on the Spirit, he brings about unity, because that's who he is, unity and diversity.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah.
So why, that seemed really easy to me. So what?
It's so easy to teach.
Yeah, why?
Everything's easy when you're teaching.
Since I don't struggle with this at all, you might be the expert here. So why is the work of unity so hard for you guys?
Yeah. Because we have to work with people like you.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, it would be interesting really to hear from 100 people why the work of unity is hard. And you would probably find a lot of overlap and then some really creative extra things, outliers. Yeah. And I'm not sure if what I'm going to give are the outliers.
These are it,
or if these are the overlap that everyone would say. But I think one reason unity is hard is because it takes practice and effort.
Yep.
Because I know what I want, and why don't you want it? So I have to practice leaning towards you in goodwill, listening to you all the way through, extending you the benefit of the doubt. Some people have to practice not being a doormat. Some people have to practice. I mean, we were talking about this with David Sawyer.
I thought you said dork.
Dork.
Sorry.
Doormat.
Doormat, yeah.
I mean, with David Sawyer, like some people have to practice standing up for themselves or standing up for their ideas.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you need in a marriage or around an elder's table is someone who's integral but never says anything. Everybody has something to do. So unity is hard because it takes practice and effort. It takes grace. Practice and effort also takes grace. If you're going to have genuine mutuality in relationships, it takes work to know when to stand for what you think and how to do so with honor to those you disagree with. And then on the other hand, when to bow to the Lord and say, well, Lord, I'm going to trust that you're speaking through my brothers or through my spouse.
So I'd be curious of what you think of this. I'll try to make it fast. I actually think culturally in the U.S., we believe this. So many of us believe the lie when it comes to like social things, like so interactions. If it takes work or takes effort, it's not natural, then it's not like real. And so what I mean is like I actually think unity often gets like there's lack of it because it takes work, and people go, well, it's probably their fault, or like it's not worth it because if there was actually something here, if there was unity was worth it, then it would just happen. Does that make sense? Like, I think we often feel that way. And the reality is no, like it actually takes effort and it takes work and it takes, and I meant it like unity starts with you kind of thing. Like it takes you like taking the initiative to move, to work, to do, to act, all that stuff. And then waiting for them to respond. And then on the other side is when you're that's risky because you have to take that step first. And then it takes a lot of trust because you're hoping that they'll take that step with you. And that's just hard because it's vulnerable. Yeah.
It's hard, it's vulnerable. It's also like the whole, if it's too hard, it must not be God's will thing, which you started with like the cultural idea that, see, I wonder on the one hand if my grandparents would think that.
Yeah.
Because they grew up through the Depression and through World War II, and everything was hard.
Yeah.
You know, like, and so on the one hand, but the other hand is, I think that idea of, well, if it's too hard, it must not be God's will or God's blessing or whatever. The flip side is everything that's easy is God's blessing. And I think that's where we get in trouble seeing like bad leadership in big churches, and they never get called on the carpet because, well, God's blessing, we got 1,000 people more here than we did last year. Or our giving is up $100,000 or something. Well, you know, and that's death. Fidelity to the gospel, faithfulness to the Lord is the only thing that matters. And we don't measure that by numerical growth or success in worldly metrics.
Yeah. What was
and those aren't bad.
You're right.
It's not a bad thing to have 1,000 more people under the sound of the gospel, if it's the sound of the gospel.
Yeah. What was the one thing more important than unity?
Faithfulness to Jesus. That's it. Not butts in the seats. Okay. Unity is hard because it takes practice and effort. Unity, I think, is also hard because it's unmeasurable and unquantifiable. You don't know if you're at 77% unity or 33% unity or 91%. You just don't know. And what is a passing grade anyway? Like, you know, I mean, we're either enjoying unity or it's slipped away and we don't know, you know, like we get it. And so it's just one of those things. And it's also fragile because there's ego at work, there's pride, there's ill-considered words that the guy didn't plan to say, but he said it. There's ill-timed words. I mean, there's my sinfulness, there's your sinfulness, there's our combined sinfulness. All of these things. I mean, you come in having a bad day and me come in having a bad day, and it might take 6 months to recover that unity if there's not this atmosphere, spirit-wrought atmosphere.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you know, there are several times that I'll call an elder on the way home from an elder's meeting and just say, hey, I don't know if I was too hard there at such and such a point, and I'm sorry if that came across too strong. And it's a 3-minute conversation on the way home, but what does it do? I own it. You know, instead of sort of saying, well, I'll talk to him tomorrow, which is what the devil wants us to do.
Yeah.
He always wants us to put off building reconciliation.
Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you, one of the most helpful things, like, this sounds like a lot, but one of the most helpful thoughts I've like the Lord's given me in a long while was just like this idea of like disunity really is the result of many necessary conversations never had. And those are the kind of necessary conversations because it's like, I mean, because disunity grows, but and I know you're going to talk about this in just a second, but you know, unity leaks. So disunity grows, unity leaks. Like you leave the disunity out there and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, it's going to be the same size. And now it's the size of a house.
Right.
But man, you think you've built all this unity and it's fortified and then all of a sudden you look at it after a month and you're like, where'd it go?
Remember that old book? Do you ever remember the old book, The King's Stilts?
Yeah.
You do?
I do.
It was a great book in elementary school. I always looked for that one in the library.
Yeah, that was the one I had to wipe all the dust off in the library.
No, not in our library. I was looking at it every week. But this island country where they had the dikes all the way around the island to keep the water out, and the king would go on his stilts checking all the dikes, and he loved it, but it was very productive. And then, you know, the grumpy old cabinet, they hated that the king would do this because it's so beneath him, and so they took away this the stilts and he got sad and whatever, and then no one was looking, and then the birds would come in and chew away at the roots, and then all of a sudden the flood would come in and the thing would get overrun. I mean, that's what we have to do with unity. We have got to get on the stilts and run all the way around, because like you said a minute ago, to change the metaphor, unity leaks.
Yeah.
And we're going to get flooded over with the factions and the selfishness and the dissipation of the unity. So we have to do the work. But the good news is momentum also works in our favor when we're working towards unity. So while it does leak, also the more we keep our finger in all the dikes, we have momentum. And that time I have to apologize to you because I've kind of broken the unity with my cutting word, let's say. The next time I have to apologize to you, if you're gracious the first time, the next time I have to apologize, so you worked for unity too, it's easier for me to do that because I'm like, Ben, I'm sorry. You know, the Lord's still working on this part of my character. And you're like, yeah, I know he is, and I love you anyway.
Yeah. It's an everyday thing, Jason.
It is an everyday thing. So it's hard because it leaks. It's fragile. It's unmeasurable. It takes practice and effort. And like we've just been saying, apologizing to each other, it requires humility.
Yeah.
Unity requires humility because I don't always get what I want.
Yeah.
And that's just true. But if you don't learn that look, if you're an adult if you're listening to this podcast and you think you still get what you want every time, let's just call in and we will talk to you. So I think what we should do here is end part one of this two-parter on unity.
Okay.
And come around again the next episode and talk about how we build it and what are some practical ways that we can work towards foundational unity in our home and our church, and then incidental unity in our home and our churches. And I think that would be a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jason, thank you so much just for walking us through this and then cutting off there, because we were about to break a record for the longest podcast we've ever done. But I'm just thankful for this because unity is, again, as I said at the beginning, just very close to my heart because I've seen the fruit of it. And I've seen what happens when it breaks. And so, friends, thank you so much for just tuning in. Look, of all the podcasts we've done, this is a great one to send to somebody because every one of us needs the steps and we need some helps and we need a reminder of why this matters and how to keep it. And we're going to talk about that more next time. So don't miss out on the next one and send this one to a friend. Thanks so much, guys, for listening. See you next time.